Putin needs a win, and he seems to think the top of the world could be his next big chance to rebuild Russian power. Is the Arctic Putin's escape route, or his bid to regain superpower status? Well, I'm Simon Diggins, and this is Superpowers Exposed, the series where we delve into the world's biggest players as they compete for global power.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security. And we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security. I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Russia and the US are now facing off across a region that's opening up rapidly, with new sea routes, vast, undiscovered resources, and a sharp rise in military activity. What used to be empty ice is turning into one of the most hotly contested places on the planet. The Arctic is for many the frozen north of the Earth. But look at the world from the north and you can see that it brings together the United States, Canada, Russia, and other countries like Norway closer together across that frozen wasteland. 8 countries own land inside the Arctic Circle, but the majority of it is within Russian territory itself. Russia owns land from the Norwegian border across the frozen northern wastes, right across through 12 time zones through to the Bering Straits, where Russia and America face each other directly. The Arctic has always been valuable for the natural resources that can be extracted from there. But with the discovery of oil and gas fields, particularly in Russia, this is becoming more important still. For Putin, the Arctic is an area which he can exploit, which helps him to develop the idea he has of himself being a superpower. In some respects, you might also see it as a consolation prize if he doesn't succeed fully in the Ukraine. Let's now look in a little bit more detail as a comparison of power between Russia and the US in the Arctic. When you first look at this scorecard and you see a comparison between these two countries, what immediately stands out is the relatively high number of icebreakers that Russia has compared to the United States. An icebreaker is a ship that's designed specifically for clearing its way through the ice itself. And it gives the country who has that the advantage of being able to move through water that otherwise is very difficult to maneuver through itself. While we show only here the 3 icebreakers that the United States have, other countries like Canada and Finland, other countries also have them. But the reality is, if you add up all the countries in the world with icebreakers, Russia has more than that combined total. Now, why is that important? What does that actually mean? It means that Russia can keep the routes open, both the ice-free routes in the summer, but also the ice routes in the winter, much longer than any other country, allowing it to maneuver, to move forces, to move bases, and to exploit the natural resources. It gives them a very distinct advantage that other countries at the moment are not in a position to match. Now, America has, with allies, got a plan to try and increase the numbers of icebreakers they have up to some total of some 30. And that's in combination with Canada and with Finland. But it's going to take a long time to build those additional icebreakers. Russia, with its very large fleet, has not only got the most icebreakers in the world, but it's also got some of the most powerful. A number of its icebreakers are nuclear powered, giving it the ability to patrol and to break ice almost continuously. In fact, Russia is the only country in the world that has a nuclear powered icebreaker fleet. Turning now to submarines, where they're used in the hunter mode to hunt other submarines or to attack surface vessels, or as the basis for sea-launched ballistic missiles, are clearly an important part of the struggle between the US and Russia in the Arctic. And Russia has placed a large number of its submarines right up in the far north, in the Kola Peninsula, directly adjacent to the Norwegian border and to the Finnish border. They're all part of the so-called Northern Fleet, and there's a whole string of submarine bases all along that coast. The reason for this is very simple. Very largely, that area remains ice-free even in the depths of winter, and from there, the submarines can either go out under the ice, where they're largely hidden, or and they often try and do this, the Russians can then break out into the North Atlantic through the so-called Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. Some 2,000 miles of sea is very difficult to patrol, but it's probably the best opportunity that Western navies have to catch the Northern Fleet trying to exit from its bases in the north out into the Atlantic and then out into the world. One way to track Russian submarines, indeed Russian surface fleet, is through aerial surveillance of the sea. And in the P-8 Poseidon, the US and now its allies like UK have probably the most capable anti-submarine warfare aircraft in the world. It's based upon the well-tried and proven frame, and then can be equipped with radar, sonar, and indeed anti-submarine and anti-shipping missiles. Because it's based on a commercial aircraft, it can also then travel long distances and linger for a reasonable amount of time. But the numbers required to provide a continuous at-sea coverage are massive. The United States has currently some 120 of these aircraft and believes it needs some 138 to provide a continuous patrol cover, particularly over areas like the Arctic. So while there are ways to see submarines under the ice through buoys in open bits of water, nonetheless there is a distinct advantage to submariners being able to move underneath the ice because it does provide them with a degree of cover otherwise they would not have. If war ever came to the Arctic, missiles and exchange of missiles would probably be the main means that adversaries try to attack each other. God forbid it should happen, but a missile flight time from one country to another, from Russia to the US, for an intercontinental ballistic missile is about 20 minutes. And in that time, the expectation would be that the other country would have to calculate whether this is a one-off or whether they'd need to carry out some active retaliation itself. Because a lot of the submarines of the Northern Fleet are based in the Kola Peninsula, it is worth noting that the Russian doctrine is that even when they're in port, they are able to be used. This is different from where the British and the US tend to use their submarines if they're going to launch ballistic missiles itself. In order to defend themselves against missiles, both countries have established radar sites all along the north. The Americans call it their ballistic early warning system. This would give the Americans and the Canadians early warning of any incoming ballistic missiles from Russia. These radar sites are highly sophisticated and can actually detect missiles on launch. Putin's ambition is to restore Russia as a great power, and a great power recognised by all the countries of the world, but particularly by the United States. Now, Russia clearly has a genuine strategic interest in exploiting the Arctic because of its long coastline and the territory that belongs within the Arctic Circle. But it's more than that for Putin himself. His ambitions in Ukraine may well be thwarted. Certainly his more maximalist demands may well not be met, in which case his ability to move elsewhere and to exploit elsewhere will become more important still. He's never lost the idea that he'll control the Arctic. Indeed, he has ambitions, as we've seen, to go right the way up to the North Pole. But if his ambitions are thwarted in Ukraine and in the Baltic, we can expect that he'll turn his attention and focus increasingly to the north. And there are both possibilities and threats. The possibilities are endless in terms of the ability to exploit natural resources, but the threats to the west and to ourselves are also there as well. Whether it be a flashpoint in Svalbard, a Norwegian island chain that nonetheless has Russians on it, or it could be an escalation or indeed a mistake made by some of the forces who are now facing each other there. The Arctic is of strategic importance. Putin knows it, and we know it. By controlling the Arctic, both its resources and also the Northern Sea route, Putin gains leverage over the Europeans particularly. They all require the resources, and he will control whether they get them or not, and by also controlling the sea route, they can determine whether or not the goods get to them cheaper is what they need to sustain their own economy. So while in just sheer missile and submarine terms, the Russians appear to have the advantage, Finland joining NATO has now started to tilt in the opposite directions, because for the first time, those bases right along the northern coast of the Kola Peninsula can be directly threatened by ATACMS missiles based in northern Finland. Those submarine bases are within range of ATACMS missiles, NATO ATACMS missiles, based in northern Finland. This is a major change to the vulnerability of the Northern Fleet. but Russia has also been developing a series of strategic air bases in the north and also been prepared to move some of its land forces, specialised land forces, into the northern area as well, including the establishment of a new corps headquarters down in the Karelian area just north of Leningrad. By comparison, NATO does have bases in the Arctic, but some of them fairly spread out, ranging from Alaska through to Iceland and into northern Norway. So the balance of capabilities between Russia and NATO are starting to tilt, but NATO has a long way to catch up in that area. For the US, there's always an element of strategic competition with Russia, but there's also a view that America needs to be able to dominate the entire Western Hemisphere. We've seen that in Trump's attempt to try and acquire both Canada as a so-called 51st state and saying he'd take control of Greenland as well as his adventures in Venezuela and further south. For him, the United States should have the right to dominate that entire region. So for him, Russia threatening what he sees the northern bit of their area of influence, their sphere of influence, for him, that is unacceptable. For Russia, there's first, of course, what they regard as legitimate self-defense of this huge landmass with all its resources that are there. But beyond the defense of Russia itself, what Russia also recognizes is there are vast untapped natural resources within the Arctic, particularly oil and gas, which Russia wants to keep its hands on. This is critical to its economy, which is increasingly an oil and gas-based economy. In order to take forward their ambitions in the Arctic, Russia, through the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, has claimed vast swathes of the Arctic Ocean to the north of Russia itself. This is based on the geology and the geomorphology, because there are two undersea ridges which are part of the same continental shelf as Russia itself, which stretch right far into the Arctic Ocean. They've even claimed right up to the North Pole itself, and in 2007 they planted a flag on the seabed in the North Pole in order to take forward their claims. As the Arctic opens up, the world's superpowers are racing to control the top of the world. For Putin, it looks a little like a fallback plan, a chance to claw back influence after Ukraine. If Moscow locks down this region, it could tilt global trade, energy and security. We'll be watching how this all plays out in the high north. Now, whether you agree, disagree or have your own theory, please drop it into the comments. Putin's ambition is clear. He wants Russia to rise again as a superpower. But in your view, how important is the high north compared to other points of interest like Ukraine or the Baltics, or indeed elsewhere?